Bioshock has been universally praised since its release in 2007 and is considered by some as one of the greatest games of all time. Winning numerous awards upon release, such as Best of and Most Talked About Game of 2007, it should be looked at as a must-play game for every gamer. Well, I missed the hype train of 2007, but I've taken a look at this classic to see if it stands up in 2020, 13 years later. That's almost 3 console generations for crying out loud. Bioshock is a first-person shooter and action RPG developed by 2K Boston with 2K Australia and 2K Marin. It was originally published back in 2007 by Take-Two and remastered by Blind Squirrel Games and re-released as Bioshock Remastered and also included in the Bioshock collection in 2016. 2K Boston was originally Irrational Games, who created System Shock 2 in 1999. System Shock 2 is a fan-favorite game, but make no mistake, it really didn't sell well. But some of that DNA carried over to the conception of Bioshock. And I mean other than shock being in the title. Irrational was acquired in 2006 and went on to release the Bioshock franchise under the Take-Two banner. Since then, Ken Levine, head honcho at Irrational, Take-Two, 2K, whatever the company's called, he rebranded the studio yet again as Ghost Story Games in 2017. Still owned by Take-Two, of course, so he can focus on smaller story-based games. But back to Bioshock. It currently holds a Metacritic score of 96 for both Xbox 360 and PC, and it holds its own as one of the top games of 2007, beating out Call of Duty 4, tying with the Orange Box, and only losing out to Super Mario Galaxy by 1 point. It ranks around number 26 in the top scores of all time. Though that's a bit misleading, because that isn't aggregated across platforms. So some games, including Bioshock, hold multiple rankings. And certain Rockstar games come to mind as good examples of throwing it all off. But regardless, it was praised as the game of the year at the time and has clearly influenced many games that came after for its RPG elements, loot mechanics, and morality choices. Bioshock is set in 1960. You play as Jack, a man who survives a plane crash in the ocean and finds his way down to the underwater city of Rapture. Rapture was the utopian city built by Andrew Ryan, but using what is known as Adam, people spliced their genes to give them extraordinary powers. This process led to the deterioration of the city, and the vast majority of the people left are crazies known as splicers. Jack needs to use both weapons and plasmin powers to make his way through the city, trusting a few slightly less than crazy humans left, and confront Ryan to get out of Rapture alive. The game will run you around 15 hours. I played it for 20, but I had to replay a section for not saving, and I got lost a couple times. If you're not stupid, you can finish the game faster than I did. If you're replaying and know what to do and where to go, I'd imagine you can get that down to about 12 hours easily. The game is story-driven, albeit not quite the way you would call a game story-driven today. The story is there, and you move forward with your goals, but the action is what keeps the pace up. There's not really chapters or levels. There are to some extent, but it just flows from one area to the next, and one objective to the next. That's a good thing in the sense of perpetual motion. It's easy to get sucked in and just keep running and gunning, exploring and taking out anything in your path. But it's also a little weak on the payoff feeling. Completing an objective instantly hits you with another objective, so you never have any pride in actually accomplishing anything. The original game runs on the Unreal Engine 2.5, and the remastered keeps it the same. The remastered game runs in full 1080p resolution at 60 frames per second across all platforms. While not necessarily that big a change on PC, that FPS boost is a huge plus on consoles. While the original had soft and muted textures, the remastered is cleaner and crisper with much better textures. The new assets feel more 3D with deeper saturation and more vibrance. It feels less washed out. The original game was 3.7 gigabytes total size, which was decent back in 2007, but the remastered is 25 gigabytes, so that should give you a general idea of the size of the upgraded assets. But better assets aren't always everything. The lighting is more dynamic, but at times it seems to actually detract from the original. The remaster adds tons of detail, but it also seems to lose some other details at times. Take a look at this comparison, and you'll see that the remaster has better textures, such as the smudge on the glass, more assets such as fish, plant life, greater detail in the tunnel where you can make out the Big Daddy. But the signs, even though they're brighter, they're actually harder to read. The better lighting actually detracts from the design and makes it harder to see and read. Sometimes, things like the stairs of the original are cleaner looking, even with worse textures and lighting. It carries a better feeling with a wet sheen to it. Or notice how the little sister's dress looks dramatically different. The remastered has a general dirty look to it. And yeah, you can imply that it's blood, but it loses some of the impact. In the original, you can clearly see that she wiped her bloody hands clean on her dress. That's a huge aesthetic shift to lose by adding better textures. Likewise, more shading makes Big Daddy softer looking, even though there's sharper textures. The whole scene just loses some impact through it all. So without actually updating the game to a more modern engine, there's only so much that can be expected from simply upping the graphical assets. But this isn't a Bioshock Remastered review, it's a Bioshock review. So I'll just leave it with the fact that the game looks pretty good in either version and it plays well. Although there's some dated feeling playing it today. Things like stretching and clipping on your arms as they extend in certain manners, or the fact that your weapons shoot from the camera view rather than your gun. Some of that stuff still exists in modern games today, but it's much less prevalent, and it's masked and hidden better. These are not make or break items, but it was very noticeable to me in my playing. What's more important than the technical graphics though, is the style of the graphics. The art style of Bioshock is very unique, and it carries a twisted, dark, and disturbing overtone to the whole world. It's reminiscent to the old movies City of Lost Children, peppered in with some Dark City, and then all set underwater. Or, if you're more of a reader, I'll comp it to Orwell and Huxley. And I think one of the greatest triumphs of Bioshock is that it doesn't look, play, or feel like a typical video game back in 2007. Of course, a lot of those choices are pretty standard these days. Action RPGs are common, loot mechanics are common, magic systems, or plasmids in this case, they're nothing special. Dark stories are par for the course. So it's easy to take that stuff for granted today, but it was more special then. But of course, today is today. So how does it hold up playing it today by today's standards? Fairly well, I'd say. Mechanically, the game is solid. It's not perfect, and it actually feels aged when you play it. But there really isn't anything wrong with it. It's a first-person shooter, so the controls are fairly standard. Again, it's older, and also just a little bit different, with the plasmid weapon system running concurrent with the physical weapons. There are small tidbits I could critique, such as, why is there even an aim down sights? It's far harder and less accurate to ADS than to hipfire. Aiming actually sucks in this game. You know, and for a shooter, that's a pretty big deal. But once I stopped doing it, I found it was easier and more precise just to hipfire. Sound effects are designed well and fit perfectly with the graphical aesthetic. I will say that directional control of that sound seems way off, but I attribute that more to the age of the game more than anything. But the volume seems like it could be better too, especially in the remastered. You can hear enemies talking like they're right next to you, but you look around and they're nowhere to be found. In reality, they're in the next room or a floor above you, but it's hard to pinpoint them and also read whether you should engage or just move on. You sort of get used to it as you play, but it's still distracting and annoying. Likewise, the music fits with the sound effects and graphics well. Very well. They use it to build the ambiance and the time and environment superbly. It's actually a mix between original and licensed songs. Those licensed songs are key. So there's a real familiarity to some of the songs, and it reels you into the stylings of the world and being in an older time period. It's done really well. Again, there's a bit of a volume control issue where that background music is screaming loud, but it's nothing you can't deal with. The difficulty of the game is selectable, and it seems right in place. Normal is moderate, being challenging, yet never really being difficult. A lot of the difficulty depends on your looting and your choices in weapon strategies. I like that the game doesn't hold your hand, pretty much ever. They just give you tools and let you figure out what to do. Some things are pretty straightforward, like don't use electric attacks on guys with electric weapons, or fire on guys with fire weapons. But again, it's up to the player to discover the unwritten rules of the world and abide by them, which are the key weapon mechanics in the game. You have a 1-2 punch between plasmid weapons and physical weapons. Both work, but poorly, but together they work very effectively. The better you get at this weapon combo, the better you'll play. And not die. Well, except death is a mechanic in the game. Checkpoints are live, and they don't send you back in time to when you first hit them. Whatever you use is gone, but enemies don't regain the health that you depleted. Though, technically they can use health stations to heal, but you can always counter that by hacking those health stations. But that respawn mechanic is a big gripe for me. In my playing, I found that I basically used this as my biggest tool. I literally wouldn't heal when I should, because I didn't want to waste a health pack when I can simply respawn with half health for free. Sure, I died way more that way, but it didn't seem to hurt my progress at all. So I kept doing it, and it just felt sort of cheap. But that's how the game was set up. I played on normal difficulty, so maybe on a harder difficulty it would make more of a difference. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe I would have done it more. Either way, it just seemed designed poorly. Another big mechanic in the game is the upgrade system. The entire story is built around Adam and being able to get it to power yourself up. This is where the key character's little sisters come into play, and of course their guardians, the big daddies. So you get to choose to harvest the sisters for tons of Adam, or free them and get a little bit less Adam. There's a big moral choice there, and a divergent for the game ending you receive. But it's not really a big deal. For such a giant plot point and game mechanic, I really didn't feel a struggle here. You get a decent amount of Adam for saving them, and it seems plenty in the game. So sure, you might get more for harvesting them, but it didn't feel like a hindrance to not do that. It seems that they should have made you want to kill the sisters more, and have it be a huge bonus to do so, or a huge penalty not to do so. Really force the morality choice, and then have the game play out radically differently because of it. And speaking of the ending, there's two, or three if you want to get technical. Basically there's a good ending, a bad ending, and a middle ground one. Except the middle ground one is almost identical to the bad ending, so it's not really a difference in my mind. So playing the game, I can't imagine wanting to actually experience all three endings. Which brings me to the replay value. It's a fun game. I can see wanting to replay it. However, not very often. Once the story is unfolded, there's no surprises. That value can't come back. And like I said, the ending isn't really that much of an incentive either. So you're in it just for the game mechanics, which are fun, and you can vary your playstyle and make it different. But that being said, every level's basically the same. The major areas and regions of the game look different, but they all feel the same. Yes, the areas differ and things change it up slightly, but not dramatically, so it sort of seems bland for a replay. So after all these years, does the game hold up? Yeah, mostly it does. Sure, it feels a lot less special now considering there's so many games that have come after it and have been influenced by it and even done their designs and mechanics better. But even then, Bioshock is a strong game just because it's still a little bit different and just so much damn fun. I think if you like action games at all, or shooter games at all, or adventure games at all, then you really should give Bioshock a play at least once. It definitely deserves its place and is a video game classic in my mind. So what about you? When was your first trip to Rapture? Have you played the game before? Have you revisited the game since? What about the remastered? Drop me a comment below and let me know what you think. About the game, about the remastered, about the comparison. I'd love to hear it. And as always, thanks for being here and checking out the video. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next game.
Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this?
Maybe, Jack, you shouldn't be smoking on planes.